Now, in 2014, two very distinguished scientists in New Zealand came out with a report which has been used very widely in New Zealand to promote this notion of introducing mandatory fluoridation in New Zealand. It's called The Health Effects of Water Fluoridation, a review of the scientific evidence. The two scientists, Peter Gluckman, Sir Peter Gluckman, Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and Sir David Skegg, Head of the Royal Society of New Zealand. Highly distinguished scientists. But as far as reviewing the scientific evidence, this study can only be called junk science. It's very, very weak indeed. And let me give you a couple of examples. This is what they said about those 27 studies. They said the fluoride exposures in these studies were many, up to 20 times higher than any that are experienced in New Zealand or other community water fluoridation communities. In other words, they're making that same fundamental mistake of confusing concentration with dose. If you're going to compare communities where harm is caused in your own community, you've got to look at doses. And here I've highlighted the two places where the levels get up to anything close to 20 times the fluoride concentration in artificial water fluoridation. Now, there's another important thing that Gluckman and Skegg should know very well. When you've got a list of studies and you're trying to see what's relevant for protecting your community or your country, you don't look at the highest doses which have caused harm, or in this case, the highest concentrations that causes harm. You go to the lowest concentrations that cause harm. And similarly, you don't go to the weakest studies that have caused harm, but you go to the strongest studies that cause harm, and they did neither. So I'd like to turn now to one of those studies in the 27. It's a study by Zhang from 2003. I've met Zhang. We brought him over to the United States to talk at a FAN conference, and I went to the two villages where this study was done. In one village, the low fluoride village, the average fluoride in the well water was 0.36 parts per million. There's a range there. This is naturally occurring fluoride in their well water. And the high fluoride village, again, a big range, but the average was 2.5 parts per million. Notice that 0.36 is less than you have added in New Zealand, and 2.5 is more. But you're in between. This study covered a range which covers New Zealand. Now, they controlled for lead exposure and iodine intake, very important, and retrospectively for arsenic. So a good study. And they found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range between the two villages. You see this in the graph here. The black line is the low fluoride village. The dotted magenta line is the high fluoride village, and you see how the fluoride has shifted the whole IQ curve over, which means you've got far fewer highly intelligent children and more mentally handicapped children. And they don't like to use that word mentally handicapped in New Zealand. I think I've got a better definition of what this means when you have an IQ less than 70. In the United States, we say mentally handicapped. In New Zealand, they say something else. But Zhang did something extremely important. He subdivided the high fluoride village, Waimea, into 5 different subgroups of ascending fluoride concentrations. So you look at those groups in this table, A, B, C, D, E. You see how the concentration ranges at the bottom from 0.75 parts per million up to 4.16 parts per million, with concentrations in between. So a range of concentrations, and now in the blue box, you'll see the mean IQ in those 5 subgroups, going from 99.56 down to 78.38. And you've got here what always strengthens an epidemiological study, and that is a dose response, a dose response. In this case, a dose response between the concentration of fluoride in the water and the average IQ of the children. And here it is plotted. The IQ on the left-hand axis, the bottom axis, the level of fluoride in the water. So what this line suggests, at minimum, there's a drop of IQ in this study between 0.75 parts per million and 1.5 parts per million. And remember, the average in New Zealand is 0.85 parts per million. So even before you've applied any safety factor, we have a serious problem here as far as New Zealand's children is concerned, if this study is valid, if this study is good, if there's no unforeseen conflicting variable that they didn't account for.